He never asked for recognition, never demanded a raise. While others climbed over each other for attention, he stayed in the background, quietly keeping the wheels turning. First to arrive, last to leave. 12 years of tireless service. Not once did he drop the ball. Then one morning, the impossible happened. No warning, no explanation. Just a brief calendar invite at 9 a.m. Meeting with HR. By 9:15, he was holding a cardboard box. The CEO didn't even make eye contact. That's the thing about power. When you have too much of it for too long, you forget what it feels like to be powerless. You forget that the ones you step on are often the same ones who made your success possible. But here's where this story becomes unforgettable. Because that man, the one they let go without hesitation, was the last person they should have underestimated. What the billionaire didn't know was that this invisible employee wasn't just loyal. He was essential. He knew things, saw things, built things. And now that they'd severed the leash, he wasn't just free. He was dangerous. This isn't a tale of revenge. It's a reckoning, a lesson in humility written in the ruins of arrogance. And by the end of this story, the CEO who thought he had it all will be begging to take it back. His name was Daniel Reyes. To most, he was just another cog in the machine, a mid-level systems engineer tucked into the far end of the 19th floor. But behind the scenes, Daniel was the reason the company's infrastructure hadn't collapsed years ago. He'd quietly rebuilt a crumbling server system from scratch. He'd pulled all-nighters during cyber-attack threats that upper management never even heard about. When others took credit, Daniel stayed silent. Why? Because he believed in loyalty. Because he thought that someday someone up there would notice. They did, but not for the reasons he hoped. The company was called Nexora Tech, valued at $14 billion. A tech giant fueled by glossy PR and a ruthless obsession with efficiency. And at the top of that cold steel tower sat CEO Marcus Vance, a man who wore $10,000 suits and smiled through his teeth. To the public, Marcus was a visionary, a philanthropist, a genius, but inside the walls of Nexora, he was a shark in a suit, cold, clinical, and utterly void of empathy. Marcus didn't believe in people. He believed in numbers, in optics, and when quarterly reports showed a slight dip in margins, he issued a mandate, cut 10% of non-essential staff, no review, no warning, just names on a spreadsheet. Daniels was on it. What made it worse? The decision wasn't based on performance. It wasn't about merit or mistakes or misconduct. It was about how visible you were to the ones who mattered. And Daniel, he was invisible. The meeting lasted 7 minutes. "We appreciate your service," they said, without looking him in the eye. A junior HR rep read from a script. No handshake, no farewell. Just a signature on a release form and a box to carry. Out 12 years of his life in silence. And as Daniel walked through the open floor office for the last time, nobody looked up. Not because they didn't care, but because they were terrified. They had seen too many others vanish the same way. One misstep, one budget cut, one wrong name on the list, and you were gone. Erased. But Marcus Vance? He celebrated that day. He posted a LinkedIn update about streamlining for innovation. The company's stock bumped. Investors cheered. Executives got bonuses. Daniel got a severance packet and a reminder that in the eyes of power, loyalty has an expiration date. Still, he didn't lash out, not then, not in public. He spent the next few weeks in silence, retracing everything, every overtime shift, every system he'd held together, every holiday he'd missed for a job that saw him as disposable. His hands shook not from anger, but from disbelief. He wasn't just let go. He was discarded. And that's the part that hurts the most, isn't it? Not just being fired, but knowing that to them, you never truly mattered. That while you saw the company as a family, they saw you as a line item, a liability. Daniel's story isn't rare. It's a reflection of something far bigger. Millions of workers across the world wake up to find that dedication is no match for greed. That in boardrooms run by people like Marcus, efficiency is just another word for expendable. This is what betrayal looks like in the corporate age, not with knives, but with email notifications. The deeper injustice? Daniel had quietly been developing a proprietary system, one that could revolutionize server security. He pitched it internally months before. No one listened. His manager called it too ambitious. His email sat unread in a shared inbox. But after he was fired, that system suddenly became very interesting to the execs. They tried to implement it, without him, without credit, without context, and without understanding the intricate back-end code Daniel had intentionally left undocumented. They wanted his work, not him. They wanted the product of his brilliance, minus the cost of keeping the mind that built it. And that was their biggest mistake. Because while Marcus Vance and his polished executives celebrated their leaner, smarter future, they didn't realize they had just severed the one thread holding it all together. And Daniel, he wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Daniel spent the first few days in a haze. Wake up, stare at the ceiling, stare too long, then sleep again. His inbox was filled with automatic goodbyes, empty words from people who hadn't spoken to him in months. You'll land on your feet, they said. Everything happens for a reason. But when your entire identity is tied to something you gave your life to, and it tosses you out like yesterday's garbage, the silence isn't comforting. It's suffocating. He sat in the same worn hoodie for 3 days. Meals skipped. Phone calls ignored. The only noise came from the storm inside his mind, replaying that meeting on loop. The scripted HR smile, the CEO's absence, the box with his name misspelled in Sharpie. He questioned everything. Had he imagined his value? Was he truly replaceable? That kind of doubt burrows deep. It makes you forget who you are, makes you believe that maybe they were right. Maybe you really don't matter. And just when he thought he was starting to accept that, something happened. An email, not from Nexora, but from a junior dev named Sarah. She had worked under Daniel during her internship years ago. They hadn't spoken in months. The message was short, 3 lines. Hey, I know what they did. It wasn't fair, but you should know. They're using your code, and it's already breaking everything. Attached, screenshots of error logs, internal Slack messages, and one chilling line from a senior engineer. We don't know what Daniel did to the core kernel. Nothing is syncing. Daniel froze. They had stolen his work, and they were too arrogant or too ignorant to realize they couldn't run it without him. That's when the fog started to clear. That's when something inside him snapped, not in rage, but in clarity. He didn't need Nexora anymore, but Nexora, they still needed him. He stood up for the first time in hours, opened his laptop, pulled out his external drives. Slowly, deliberately, he began piecing together everything he'd once buried. Notes, code fragments, logs, backups, all of it. Because if they were going to play dirty, they'd forgotten one crucial fact. Daniel Reyes was the architect of their stability, and every system has a heartbeat, and he was the pulse. But retaliation wasn't his goal. Daniel wasn't looking for revenge. He wanted something deeper, more dangerous. Exposure. For years, Nexora had buried skeletons beneath sleek quarterly reports. They'd exploited employees, cut corners on data privacy, even quietly covered up a massive security breach that would have tanked their valuation had it gone public. Daniel had kept quiet because he believed in the company, because he thought doing the right thing meant staying loyal. But now, he owed them nothing. He gathered documents, backups, internal emails, evidence he'd never meant to weaponize. But that's what betrayal does. It redefines your boundaries. It sharpens your silence into a blade. And yet, something held him back. A single moment. It was late, 2:43 a.m. He stared at the blinking cursor of a drafted email. All it needed was one click, and the story of Nexora's corruption would flood into the inbox of every major tech journalist in the country. But he didn't click it, not yet. Instead, he stared at his own reflection in the darkened screen and asked himself the one question no one had dared to ask him. What do I want? It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't their approval. It was truth, dignity, recognition. Not just for him, but for every person like him. The ones who worked in silence, who were told they didn't matter, who were treated like shadows in the very places they helped build. And suddenly, his purpose crystallized. He wouldn't just expose Nexora, he would outmaneuver them. The time for loyalty was over. The time for precision had begun. By dawn, Daniel had made a decision. He filed paperwork to register his own consulting firm. Not flashy, not public, just a name, a domain, and a mission to protect the workers behind the curtain. He reached out to people he trusted, ex-colleagues, quiet allies, people who knew what Nexora had become, but never had the voice or the proof to speak up. Daniel had both now, and the fire in his eyes. It wasn't rage anymore. It was resolve, because when the world tells you that you're invisible, and then watches you rise. Anyway, that's when power starts to shift. And Marcus Vance? He had no idea the countdown had already begun. Marcus Vance didn't notice it at first. The system glitches, the strange lag, a few delayed syncs. It was chalked up to minor bugs, growing pains from innovation. After all, Nexora had just rolled out a new proprietary system, the one Daniel had built and they had hijacked. But by week 3, the cracks had widened into fault lines. Customer accounts weren't updating. Security alerts were failing to trigger. Data logs were incomplete, vanishing even from backup servers. And the worst part, no one could trace the source. The codebase was too complex, too bespoke, because it wasn't designed to be understood by anyone, except the man they had fired. Marcus called for an emergency engineering huddle. His voice, usually so smug and composed, now trembled behind his polished facade. I want this fixed. Yesterday. But his CTO, a man Daniel had once trained, just shook his head. We can't reverse engineer it, Marcus. Daniel didn't just build the system, he wove it. In the corner of that same meeting, someone dropped the real bomb. We think it's phasing into lockout mode. Lockout mode. A fail-safe protocol only Daniel knew how to disable. And once it fully activated, Nexora's entire server architecture would encrypt itself from the inside. No backdoor, no override. Panic spread like wildfire. Engineers scrambled, directors argued, legal teams whispered about lawsuits. But while Nexora was trying to fight the ghost in their own machine, Daniel was quietly, methodically, moving. He didn't need to rush. He knew the system better than they ever would. Every missed sync, every unresolved ticket, it was all part of the design. Not sabotage, not revenge. Just a reminder that some things can't be stolen without consequence. But the real checkmate, that was still coming. Daniel had partnered with a data ethics nonprofit, one that specialized in exposing corporate malpractice. With their help, he released a detailed white paper. It was surgical, objective. It didn't name-drop executives or throw accusations. It simply laid out, in precise technical language, the unethical practices Nexora had buried for years. Outdated encryption, internal, fraud reports ignored, whistleblower suppression. The report went viral. Tech journalists picked it up. Former employees stepped forward. Anonymous posts flooded Reddit and Glassdoor. Investors started asking questions. And then, just when the chaos reached a boiling point, Daniel did something no one expected. He gave Nexora a chance to come clean. He offered to step in as an external consultant to stabilize the failing systems for a fair rate, publicly, transparently, on his terms. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a power move. A man once fired without a second glance was now the only person who could keep their empire from collapse. The role reversal was complete. Marcus refused. At first, his pride wouldn't allow it. He called Daniel a bitter ex-employee in a press interview, said the glitches were routine scaling issues. But behind closed doors, his board wasn't buying it. Shareholders were threatening legal action. Clients were terminating contracts. The stock dropped 14% in a week. The house of cards was falling. And then came the breaking point. Nexora's largest client, a government cloud security provider, issued a formal statement suspending its contract pending a third-party audit. The message was clear: either fix the system or face public breach charges. Marcus had no choice. He called Daniel. The call lasted 7 minutes, exactly as long as the meeting where Daniel was fired, except this time, he was the one leading the conversation. No NDA, Daniel said flatly. No gag order. If I come in, it's on record. Everything. Marcus hesitated. And my name goes back on the system, Daniel added. As architect, not ghostwriter. Silence. Then, finally, fine. Daniel didn't celebrate. He wasn't interested in gloating. What he wanted was something Marcus couldn't fake. Acknowledgement. He walked back into Nexora, not as an employee, but as the man they couldn't function without. Colleagues who once looked through him now stood aside in silence. Even the executives avoided eye contact, because deep down, they knew. They had fired the foundation, and now they were paying the price. But what truly broke Marcus wasn't the technical nightmare, or the financial fallout, or the headlines. It was when Daniel, standing in the middle of that sleek executive floor, was approached by a young programmer, barely out of college. "Hey," she whispered, "thanks for coming back. We hoped you would." That's when Marcus realized it wasn't just about systems anymore. It was about respect. And Daniel had earned something Marcus couldn't buy: legacy. The irony? Daniel never planned this. He didn't plant traps or write revenge code. He simply built something that required trust to operate. And when they betrayed that trust, the system responded exactly as it was designed to. It protected itself from people like Marcus. Now, Daniel was more than just a consultant. He was a symbol, a quiet rebellion in a loud, greedy world. Proof that humility and skill, when pushed too far, could become a force more powerful than any title. Marcus Vance had built $1 billion empire. But in trying to erase the man who built its core, he ensured his own downfall. The news broke quietly at first. A shareholder vote. A sudden change in leadership. Just weeks after Daniel's return, Nexora's board ousted Marcus Vance. The public reason? Strategic realignment. But insiders knew the truth. Marcus wasn't removed because of the system failures. He was removed because the illusion had shattered. The man who once prided himself on vision had missed the most important one of all. Respect is not a cost. It's the foundation. Daniel didn't attend the press conference. He didn't need to. The world already knew. His name, once buried in back-end systems and erased from internal decks, now appeared on headlines, white papers, and even keynote panels. But Daniel never gloated. He simply walked forward. The consulting firm he launched quietly grew into something bigger. It wasn't just about contracts. It became a sanctuary for tech workers tired of being used and discarded. Engineers, designers, analysts, people who had been told they weren't essential, only to watch their stolen work fuel billion-dollar profits. And Nexora? They survived, but not untouched. A full compliance audit was launched. Former employees testified under whistleblower protections. Class action discussions began surfacing online. What once looked like a powerhouse now resembled something else, entirely, a cautionary tale. But the most poetic part of it all? A year later, Nexora announced their new CTO at an innovation summit. It was Sarah, the same intern who had first warned Daniel with a single brave email. In the crowd that day, Daniel sat unnoticed, no suit, no title badge, just watching, quietly, proud. Because justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like the right people rising. And Marcus. Last seen speaking at a second-tier business school, spinning sanitized lessons about resilience while carefully avoiding questions about his fall from grace. The man who once believed power was permanent now knew better. Because in the end, Daniel hadn't just exposed a broken system, he had redefined it. By showing the world that integrity isn't weakness, it's power. That being unseen doesn't mean being unworthy, and that sometimes the quietest voice can bring down the loudest fraud. As Daniel walked out of the auditorium that day, someone stopped him. An intern, barely out of school, notebook in hand. "Sir," she said, breathless, "can I ask, what made you come back after everything?" Daniel smiled, not bitterly, not proudly, just peacefully. "I didn't come back to fix their mess," he said. "I came back to make sure no one else ever had to feel disposable." She scribbled it down, nodded, and ran to catch up with the rest of her group. And just like that, Daniel disappeared into the crowd again. No fanfare, no stage, but somewhere in that massive building, his legacy echoed. Quiet, powerful, unforgettable.